I speak to you today with feelings of profound sorrow.
King Charles had endured public scandal, private loss, and decades of scrutiny without allowing the crown to see him completely unravel. But this was different. Behind closed doors, Prince William revealed a final request connected to Diana, one that placed Catherine at the center of a promise made long before she became Princess of Wales. Charles listened in silence. Then his composure broke, because William's revelation was not simply about the past, it was about the monarchy's future. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William had asked for the meeting at Windsor. Windsor, one of the monarch's residences, carried the weight of family history. The prince came with a recorded private account, preserved among Diana's family papers, an instruction he had understood in fragments. Now, as a husband and future king, he believed its meaning could no longer remain buried. William chose his words carefully. Diana's last request, he told Charles, was that if her eldest son married the woman who would stand beside him as future queen, he must protect her from the isolation, pressure, and emotional abandonment that had consumed Diana herself. Catherine was not to become another woman swallowed by the crown. The Princess of Wales, the title held by the wife of the heir apparent, was to be treated as a person before she was treated as a symbol. Charles did not answer. His fingers tightened against the chair, and William saw the change. The king understood what those words implied. Diana's request was not an attack, yet it forced him to remember an environment in which their marriage had fractured while duty kept moving. William refused to accuse him. That mercy cut deeper. He said Catherine's well-being was not negotiable, and that his mother's warning had shaped how he approached marriage, fatherhood, and the monarchy's future. Charles finally looked at his son. "How long have you known?" William admitted that he had carried pieces of the message for years, but only after Catherine entered royal life did the full warning become clear. Then he revealed the sentence that broke the king's restraint. Diana feared another woman might one day disappear inside the institution. Charles rose abruptly, took several steps, then stopped. The monarch who had spent a lifetime mastering control could no longer hide what those words had touched. He lowered himself into the chair, struggling to speak, while William remained still. But the prince had not yet explained why he had chosen this moment. Charles was about to learn what had recently happened to Catherine, and grief was about to become something far more dangerous. To understand why Diana's request shattered Charles so completely, the people inside that Windsor room had to be seen not as royal titles, but as a family carrying unfinished grief. William was not simply a son confronting his father. He was a husband defending his wife with the memory of his mother beside him. Catherine, though absent from the conversation, had suddenly become the emotional bridge between two generations of royal women. William had spent his adult life trying to reconcile duty with memories no child should have had to carry. He remembered Diana struggling beneath relentless public pressure, and he had built his marriage around avoiding that emotional trap. Catherine understood that royal service would demand sacrifice. Yet the Princess of Wales, the title traditionally held by the wife of the heir to the throne, was never meant to lose herself inside it. For the prince, protecting her stability and their children's private life was not weakness, it was responsibility. Charles felt the meaning differently. Diana's words dragged regret into the room, with a force he could not escape, because her concern had not been revenge against him. She had been thinking about a woman she would never meet, someone who might one day carry the same title and face crushing expectations. The king understood that distinction, and it hurt more. Catherine was not being compared to his former wife. She was being protected from the loneliness Diana had feared could happen again. Charles finally asked the question he had been holding back. Did Catherine know? William paused before answering. She understood the meaning of his mother's request, he said, but not every painful phrase. The future king had kept some of Diana's words from his wife, because he never wanted her to feel she had inherited another woman's tragedy. Catherine deserved her own life, her own identity, and her relationship with the crown, the monarchy as an institution. William then explained how specific Diana had been in the recorded account he had preserved, a private recording containing her own words. She had imagined her eldest son marrying a woman who would face comparison, criticism, endless expectation, and pressure from an institution larger than any individual. Charles listened, and realized the request had never centered on jewels, rank, or succession, the order determining who inherits the throne. It was about emotional survival. Charles reached toward a framed family photograph and quietly turned it face down. Then he looked at William and asked what had happened to Catherine recently. The prince took a long breath. His answer began with a private palace meeting she had left visibly shaken. The real story had started days earlier, when Catherine walked away carrying an expression William remembered painfully from Diana. Every royal crisis has a moment that looks insignificant, until everything after it gives that moment meaning. In this story, it happened during a closed family strategy meeting. No cameras, no cheering crowds, no public spectacle. Catherine entered expecting a difficult conversation about duty. She left feeling that decisions about her life were being made around her, rather than with her. When William saw her afterward, one expression on her face dragged him instantly back toward Diana. Catherine had already accepted a demanding public role, but this meeting pushed further. The Prince and Princess of Wales, the titles carried by the heir to the throne and his wife, were being asked to absorb more ceremonial duties, overseas appearances, and family obligations, in the name of continuity. That mattered because continuity is how the monarchy preserves stability from one generation to the next. But William believed stability meant little if the people carrying it were quietly being worn down. Catherine listened until one detail changed everything. Several major engagements had already been provisionally placed into her schedule, without a direct conversation with her, and without William's agreement. She looked across the table and asked, calmly, who had authorized that assumption. No one answered immediately. The silence told her enough. She closed the folder, pushed back her chair, and said duty could not mean surrendering every personal boundary simply because others found it convenient. William found her alone later, and the anger he expected was not there. Catherine was hurt. She told him the workload itself was not the deepest problem. What frightened her was the feeling of becoming a role before being treated as a person. The prince heard the words and felt something inside him tighten, because Diana had once described the same slow erosion in private conversations he had never forgotten. His wife was not his mother, but the pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. William returned that evening to the recorded account connected to Diana, a preserved private recording containing her own words. He reread the request he had carried for years, and one sentence suddenly stopped feeling like memory. It felt like instruction. Protect the woman beside you before the institution convinces you sacrifice is unavoidable. The future king understood then that quiet protection was no longer enough. William made his decision before the night ended. If the crown, the institution of monarchy itself, was creating the very conditions Diana had feared, Charles had to hear the warning in full. By the following day, the prince was no longer only a concerned husband. He was a son carrying his mother's words directly toward the man most haunted by what happened to her all those years. William had spent years avoiding the cruelest version of this conversation. He never wanted Diana's memory turned into a weapon against Charles. But protecting his father from old pain could no longer come before protecting Catherine from new pain. Behind a closed door, with no aides to soften the language, and no courtiers to interrupt, the future king finally told the reigning monarch where duty ended, and where a husband's responsibility began. William explained what had happened in Catherine's meeting, and he refused to reduce it to a scheduling dispute. What disturbed him was the assumption that her limits could be decided before she was even asked. Charles listened, then defended the pressure surrounding senior royals. The monarchy, he said, had always demanded sacrifice. William answered that tradition, the customs carried forward because the institution has long relied on them, could explain pressure, but it could not excuse repeating damage everyone already understood. William leaned forward. I watched what this life did to Mummy. I will not watch it happen to Catherine. Charles stiffened. For several seconds, neither man spoke. The silence became heavier than the argument itself, because the king heard accusation where his son intended warning. Finally, he asked the question beneath every other question. Did William believe he had failed Diana? William did not take the easy path. He refused to turn his parents' marriage into a single verdict, or make Charles carry every failure alone. But he said everyone failed when the institution became more important than the person trapped inside it. The crown, meaning the monarchy as a continuing institution, rather than one individual sovereign, could survive change. A person pushed beyond endurance might not. Charles pushed his chair backward and turned away. William recognized the movement instantly for what it was: retreat. The king admitted that hearing Catherine's experience spoken beside Diana's name made the past feel present again. He had spent years learning to live with memory. Now memory seemed to be sitting across from him, speaking through his son. William then delivered the part he had feared most. In Diana's recorded private account, she had warned that her eldest son might one day be pressured to choose between protecting his wife and protecting the machinery around the crown. The prince told Charles that he had already chosen. Charles turned back. Grief was still there, but something harder had entered his voice. He asked who had approved the decisions affecting Catherine. William gave him the answer. For the first time that evening, Charles stopped defending the system and began examining it. And what he discovered would shift the balance of authority inside the royal household, before another mistake became a lasting wound. Palaces survive through procedure. Calendars are negotiated, obligations distributed, appearances coordinated, and expectations quietly passed downward until no single person seems responsible. But Charles now saw the danger in that machinery. Diana's warning had exposed a brutal possibility. A system could injure someone without anyone believing they had personally caused harm. So the king stopped asking how the schedule had been created. He began asking who possessed the authority to change it, and who had failed to use it. Charles began tracing how decisions around William and Catherine moved through the royal household. The machinery of the crown, meaning the network of offices and staff that supports the monarch and senior royals, had allowed assumptions to harden into plans. No single person had acted with open cruelty. That made the discovery worse. Institutional momentum had become its own form of pressure, and the king understood that inherited procedure could still cause damage even when nobody intended harm. Charles sat alone after the review, removed his glasses, and pressed his fingers against his eyes. Then he whispered Diana's name once. Not in anger, in recognition. The very danger she had feared could return without conspiracy, without malice, simply because too many people had learned to treat sacrifice as normal. For the monarch, that truth stripped away the comfort of blaming one person and left him facing a deeper responsibility. William wanted immediate protection around Catherine. Charles hesitated. He feared that sudden intervention could be seen as favoritism or weakness, especially when senior royals were expected to absorb extraordinary pressure without complaint. The prince answered sharply that protecting a future queen from preventable damage was not indulgence. It was stewardship, the duty to preserve both the institution and the people expected to carry it forward. Catherine received the news privately, and unease replaced relief. She worried William's confrontation had made her appear unwilling to serve. The princess feared becoming the center of another palace dispute, when all she had asked for was a voice in decisions affecting her own life. William reassured her that the opposite had happened. Her willingness to serve was exactly why her limits had to matter. Charles made the decision before the day ended. No major expansion of Catherine's duties would move forward without direct consultation with her and William. Senior staff were also ordered to separate constitutional necessity, meaning duties essential to the monarchy's formal role, from habits preserved merely because they had always been done. And not everyone welcomed the shift with quiet acceptance. Charles had changed the rules inside the room. Outside it, the palace was already adjusting, and Catherine was about to discover that protection could bring its own uncomfortable spotlight. Catherine had never asked to become the symbol of Diana's unfinished pain. She had spent years creating her own identity, her own marriage, her own way of serving the crown. Yet suddenly a private request from a woman she never met was reshaping decisions around her. When William explained what he had told Charles, Catherine did not respond with triumph. She became silent, because being protected by Diana's memory carried an emotional burden almost as complicated as the pressure it was meant to prevent. William told Catherine that Charles had changed the process governing major additions to her royal workload. The king had made the decision himself after hearing what happened in the palace meeting and learning the full meaning of Diana's request. No major expansion would now move forward without direct consultation. Catherine understood why her husband had acted, yet relief never came easily. She feared people would see protection as proof that she needed special treatment, rather than recognition that every person serving the monarchy still possessed limits. Catherine looked down and stayed quiet for several seconds. Then she told William she never wanted their children to believe their mother had been too fragile for duty. The prince answered immediately. Protecting someone from being overwhelmed was not the same as believing they were weak. He reminded her that strength did not require silent exhaustion, and service did not become more honorable simply because suffering remained hidden. Catherine's composure shifted when William explained why her words after the earlier meeting had disturbed him so deeply. They echoed feelings Diana had once expressed privately about disappearing beneath expectation. Catherine became emotional, but her response was firm. She did not want to replace his mother. She did not want every difficult moment in her own life measured against a tragedy that belonged to another woman. William took her hand and told her that was exactly the point. Diana's request had never asked him to find another version of her. His mother had asked him to protect the individuality of the woman he chose, especially when royal duty began demanding more than anyone admitted aloud. Catherine finally understood that the promise was not a shadow hanging over her marriage. It was a boundary drawn around it. William then told her something unexpected. Charles wanted to apologize personally, not as sovereign to princess, but as father-in-law to daughter-in-law. Catherine hesitated. The request unsettled her because it proved how deeply the revelation had truly reached him personally. Soon, Charles and Catherine would meet without William present, and when that door closed, schedules and procedures would disappear from the conversation, leaving only the one name both had carefully avoided: Diana. There were no private secretaries in the room, no William, no carefully prepared talking points. Charles had asked Catherine to meet him because some conversations lose their meaning the moment an institution enters them. The king had spent years learning how to speak publicly about duty, continuity, and service. But now he faced his daughter-in-law with none of those protections. Knowing that to explain his reaction, he would have to speak honestly about Diana. Catherine entered expecting formality. But Charles stopped that immediately. He told her she was not there to defend herself, and that he regretted allowing decisions about her responsibilities to move forward without her voice carrying enough weight. The monarch explained that William's account of Diana's request had stripped the issue down to something painfully simple. The institution, the monarchy, and the system surrounding it could never be allowed to matter more than the human being asked to serve it. Catherine listened carefully before telling Charles what had troubled her most. She never wanted her experience placed beside Diana's suffering, as if the two women were living the same story. The king nodded. Comparison, he said, was not the lesson. Prevention was. That distinction mattered, because Catherine was not being asked to inherit another woman's pain. She was being given the chance to avoid the kind of emotional isolation that had once gone unrecognized until it was too late. Charles paused before saying more. Diana's request had forced him to remember moments when he had seen unhappiness and misunderstood its depth. His voice faltered, and for several seconds he said nothing. The monarch finally admitted that regret becomes heavier when a person realizes the warning signs were visible long before the consequences became permanent. Catherine answered without accusation. She told Charles that William carried his mother's memory intensely, especially when duty began colliding with private well-being. The princess said her husband could tolerate pressure directed at himself far more easily than anything that reminded him of Diana's loneliness. Charles admitted he sometimes forgot how present that loss remained inside both sons, even after so many years. Charles then made the decision unmistakable. The protections surrounding Catherine's schedule were not temporary and were not symbolic. Her voice would have formal priority whenever the scale or timing of her commitments changed, because endurance could never be mistaken for infinite capacity. The king wanted that principle understood clearly. Catherine rose to leave, but Charles stopped her with one final request. He asked her to tell William something simple. His mother's request had been heard. That sentence would not remain private for long. What began as a family reckoning was about to become a national conversation, and Diana's words would soon carry far beyond Windsor. Once the story broke beyond palace walls, the reaction was immediate, not because Britain had discovered another royal dispute, but because Diana's final request sounded painfully familiar. Decades after her death, the central fear attributed to her was not about revenge, succession, or status. It was about protecting another woman from disappearing beneath royal expectation. And as the details reached the public, Catherine's name became linked to Diana's legacy in a way neither William nor Charles had intended. William found himself at the center of a national conversation he had never wanted to create. Media coverage focused on the emotional triangle behind the disclosure. Diana's warning, his decision to honor it, and Charles's breakdown after hearing what those words truly meant. Palace staff stressed that Catherine's role remained central and demanding. The change concerned consultation and family stability, meaning her responsibilities would still be substantial, but major decisions would no longer move forward as if personal limits were irrelevant. Catherine became the symbol of that shift almost overnight. A major morning newspaper carried photographs of Diana and the princess beneath the headline, "Her Last Wish, Protect the Next Princess." Copies were held outside Windsor as broadcasters debated whether the story represented royal healing or a painful admission of old institutional failure. The comparison made Catherine uncomfortable, yet William understood why the public response had become so intense. Diana's warning had suddenly transformed private family pain into something millions could recognize. Charles refused to answer the debate publicly. The king knew any attempt to defend himself would drag the story backward toward blame, when the decision he had made was supposed to move the family forward. By afternoon, a small crowd had gathered near Windsor Castle. Among flowers left in Diana's memory sat one handwritten message: "Let Catherine be Catherine." Broadcasters repeated the words because they captured the issue more clearly than any formal palace statement could. Catherine chose action over explanation. She continued with a carefully selected royal engagement and carried herself with quiet confidence, making clear that Diana's request had never been about retreating from duty. William understood the message immediately. His wife was not stepping away from service. She was insisting that service should never require the disappearance of the person performing it. Charles watched the reaction unfold without speaking, but privately he reached one final decision. Diana's request would not remain merely an emotional story attached to Catherine's name. It would become a lasting principle. The world had interpreted Diana's words in 1,000 different ways. Now Charles was ready to decide what they would ultimately mean. In the end, the greatest consequence of Diana's final request was not that it made Charles cry. It was that the grief forced a decision. The past could not be rewritten. A failed marriage could not be repaired decades later, and a mother could not return to see the family her sons had built. But one mistake could still be prevented from becoming an inheritance. Diana's words had crossed generations, and now the monarchy had to decide whether it had truly learned from them. Charles met William in the same room where it began. This time, the king did not sit behind a desk or shelter himself behind formality. He told his son that the changes surrounding Catherine's duties would remain permanent, not as a temporary concession born from emotion, but as a principle of responsible royal planning. The crown, meaning the monarchy as an enduring institution, would protect continuity without demanding damage from those carrying its future. William listened without triumph. The prince had never wanted victory over his father. He wanted proof that Diana's warning had been understood. Charles stepped closer and said, "You did what she asked you to do." For several seconds, William could not answer. The future king had feared that his mother's memory might become another wound between them. Instead, those words turned it into a shared responsibility. Catherine's place in the outcome mattered deeply. She continued serving without retreating, without being diminished, and without being treated as Diana's replacement. The Princess of Wales remained herself. Her strength was no longer measured by how much pressure she could silently absorb, but by the confidence with which she could serve while protecting her family, her identity, and the boundaries William had promised to defend. Charles finally understood what his breakdown had meant. It was not collapse, it was reckoning. The king could not erase Diana's loneliness or repair the years that had shaped their painful history, but he could refuse to normalize the conditions she had feared. That choice gave regret a purpose beyond sorrow. Diana's final request was answered without ceremony, proclamation, or public tribute. Catherine would never be asked to disappear in order to serve the crown. William protected his wife without abandoning duty. Charles accepted the lesson without defending the past. The monarchy moved forward with a harder truth. No institution survives by sacrificing the people inside it. There was nothing left unresolved. Diana could not change what happened to her, but through William, Catherine, and Charles, her warning changed what would happen next. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.